near borders. So, and as we all know that maritime sector is going across or cutting across the oceans. It's not only about Tanzania, but it's about the whole world working together to ensure that we are safe and the international trade is being moved smoothly. I would also like to introduce Professor Jens Schroeder. Yeah, because he's here, I cannot close my eyes. I can see you. Thank you. And he is the Vice President of the World Maritime University. So together, he came with the President. If I may say something small about Professor Max Meyer, to introduce him officially before his presentation. Professor Maximo Meyer Jr. is the President of the World Maritime University. The university is located in Malmö, Sweden, and it is an international maritime organization center of excellence for postgraduate maritime education. Prior to his appointment as WMU president in 2023, Professor Max had been a member of the WMU faculty since 1998. He holds a Bachelor of Science, U.S. Navy Naval Academy, Masters of Arts, Law and Diplomacy, Fletcher School, Masters of Science of the World Maritime University, and PhD from Lund University. As the Chief Executive Officer, Professor Meyer oversees and directs academic programs, operations, and administration of the university. Professor Meyer has been a resident faculty member since 1998 and held various positions at WMU, including Director of the PhD program, Head of Maritime Law and Policy Specialization, and the Nippon Foundation Professor of Maritime Governance, Policy and Administration. He is the author of more than 70 published articles and book chapters, and the editor and co-editor of 12 books. His multidisciplinary research and teaching include maritime policy, maritime law, maritime labor law and policy, human factor, safety and security related issues. I was taught by Professor Meyer in 2006 at the World Maritime University, and that was maritime security. Aside from senior leadership roles in WMU, Professor Meyer served as administrator. He was Director General of the Maritime Industry Authority, Marina, Assistant Chief of Staff of Navigational Safety in the Philippines Coast Guard, and Deputy Executive Director of Multi-Sector Task Force on Maritime Development. In 2013, Lloyd's List included Professor Meyer in its list of the world's 100 most influential persons in the shipping industry. That in short, so that I do not take much of the time, the goodies of the lecture, that is Professor Meyer, who we are going to hear from this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Do we have a person? No. Okay, we can continue. Of all the many attributes, including the 70 publications and books, there is another aspect of Professor Meyer that you have to know. He is a linguist, speaks several languages, including Spanish, English, you know. And now, since he's in Tanzania, we welcome him to Kiswahili. Kindly accept it. That aspect of him being the Director General of Philippines Maritime Transport Authority, it gives me an highlight. As we know, Philippines leads in having the seafarers, the quantity of seafarers. About 30% of the world's seafarers are coming from Philippines. We also would like to take that lesson and turn our seafarers, at least they should reach 10%, not 30 as you, and not replace you, but in addition to you. With that small note, I will take this opportunity to welcome the professor to give us a lecture on maritime policy from wreckage to regulation. The word wreckage means a shipwreck. But now he's talking about policy. Can a policy be wrecked? That we have to hear from him, and kindly, you're welcome. Karibu.
Asante sana. I don't know if it's proper to say this, but Jambo. It is truly an honor and a privilege for me to be here this afternoon. And I would like to thank the Dar es Salaam Maritime Institute through its rector, Professor Tumaini Gurumo, for organizing this event and allowing me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts on this topic, maritime policy from wreckage to regulation. It's just meant to provoke, but it's not as dramatic as it sounds. But anyhow, I think through the lecture, you will get a better sense of my meaning with this title. But before that, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce those of you who might not be familiar with the World Maritime University to the beloved institution which I represent. So the World Maritime University is an institution of higher learning delivering postgraduate programs in maritime and oceans affairs based in Malmö, Sweden. So this is in the southern part of Sweden. It was established in 1983 by the International Maritime Organization. So the university operates under the auspices of the IMO. And the mission, as it states here, is to be the world center of excellence in postgraduate maritime and oceans education, professional training and research, while building global capacity and promoting sustainable development. Very shortly, very briefly, our vision is to inspire leadership and innovation for a sustainable maritime and oceans future. And we have a global impact. In the 42 years that the university has been in operation, we have had 6,342 alumni from 171 countries and territories. I highlight that there are almost 1,500 females among these graduates. It might not seem significant compared to the almost 6,500 graduates, but that is because in the first 20 to 25 years of the university was struggling to attract women to enroll in its programs. Today, I'm very pleased to inform you that we are on average enrolling 43% women in our programs. Just to highlight also, Tanzania is regularly represented at the university, having had so far 95 graduates, 92 of them in the MSc, Master of Science program. As you will see here, also paying attention to the map, you will see that the region that is most represented is Asia, but after that, it's Africa. We deliver on our mandate through the following programs. The flagship program is the Master of Science degree program that we deliver in Malmö, Sweden, together with 2 off-campus programs that we deliver in China, one in Dalian, one in Shanghai. We also have a PhD program. In contrast to the master's program, which is resident in-house on location for 14 months, the PhD program is flexible. It is not necessarily resident. A PhD candidate may be resident in Malmö, but he or she may also be based in their hometown, in their country of domicile. Aside from that, we have also very flexible online postgraduate diploma programs in different disciplines. We also deliver shorter professional development courses, and we are engaged heavily not only in research but also in technical cooperation activities organized by our parent organization, the International Maritime Organization. So with that introduction, I would like to now go to the substance of this afternoon's public lecture. And that is really maritime policy. But as we go into maritime policy, allow me to refresh you on some basic concepts in public policy. And with this, I would like to look at the concept of policy, more specifically public policy, and introduce the classic policy cycle. Now, policy, some definitions of policy include these 2: decisions giving direction, coherence, and continuity to the courses of action for which the decision-making body is responsible. So here it emphasizes that there is a decision to be made, and that decision provides direction. And it's clearly stated, and it is meant to be continuous, and meant to be well planned and well thought out, and something for which the responsible body is responsible. So it's not only making the policy, but ensuring that the policy is implemented. Here's another definition of policy, or description of policy: a purposive course of action taken or adopted by those in power in pursuit of certain goals or objectives. Again, I would like to emphasize here with this description the fact that there are goals, there are aspirations, there are objectives. And it's not only ideas, but actual actions that are involved. So it's not only a matter of dreaming up what you would like to achieve, but actually bringing in also the requisite actions. Because of course not one definition of these constructs define the whole concept. They define different parts of the concept itself. Now, moving over to public policy, meaning to say focusing this concept of policy into the public realm, into the realm of government. You might say that public policy is the sum total of government action from signals of intent to the final outcomes. Now I like this definition in its simplicity, because it really brings to mind a basket of actions, as it were, a number of programs, but it's not starting only with the intent or the action, but even the signal of intent. And we will get there. We will understand this better later when we look at the policy cycle. Here's a very simple description. Public policy is whatever the government chooses to do or not to do. Now, this is very important, because policy is not only something that the government decides to do. The fact that the government decides not to do something is also part of policy. It's an active act of not doing anything on a particular issue. It can also be described as the authoritative allocation of values for the whole society. This description of public policy tells us that the decision makers are trying to impart, are trying to share with the public a set of values that they wish to imbue upon the public, to convince the public that this is for the public good. And the last example here is describing public policy as the expressed intentions of government actors relative to a public problem and the activities related to those intentions. So in a way, bringing all of these different concepts together. Now, let's look at some models or descriptions of the policy cycle, because it is generally understood that policies are developed and go through cycles. This particular policy cycle, put together by Professor Kearney, starts with, at the very right hand, the upper right hand quadrant, starts with agenda setting. So this is, in a way, recognition that something needs to be done. And then followed by policy formulation, so putting together the set of actions that need to be done. And then there's the next stage, which is legitimation, and this is bringing it to the public, bringing it to different agencies of government to vet and to legitimize that this particular policy that is being proposed is necessary and sound and will contribute to the public good. And then when the policy is legitimized, then, or legitimated, then it is implemented. For what is a policy if it is not put into action? Once a policy is implemented, then it must be evaluated, because there is a wide gap between a particular intent and plan and the actual result, because in between, what comes in between these 2 points, it's human beings. And of course, in the course of human management of events, there is bound to be some deviation. So the policy must be evaluated to see what kind of adjustments might need to be made. And that is where we go to the next step. What do we need in order to maintain the policy if it's good? What do we need to replace the policy with if it's not as good or not so good? Or if the policy turns out to be a failure, then you might also decide to terminate the policy. So that's one type of policy cycle. Another one is proposed by Jan and Wegerich, and they condense this into 4 stages. Agenda setting, which is recognition of the problem and selecting the issue, and then policy formulation and decision making, so combining the formulation part with legitimation, and then implementation, and then they move up to evaluation and termination. Again, consolidating 2 phases that were heretofore separate events in the Kearney cycle. Another cycle I would like to share with you is the PDCA cycle, the Deming or the Schuhart cycle as it's called. Those of you who are familiar with engineering, quality assurance, safety science, you might be familiar with this. And in a way, this cycle just came to mind when I was looking at public policy cycles. In a way, it's the same sort of cycle of plan what you need, plan what needs to be done, and then you do it, and then you check, and you make adjustments, and then you go through that cycle again. So it's a cycle of continuous improvement. So it's the virtuous cycle, as it were. So based on this, I was trying to also digest these different cycles in my own mind to make it a little bit simpler for me to understand it, and for me to be able to impart it in what I thought was a more straightforward manner. And this is what I propose to describe the policy cycle: agenda setting, policy formulation, implementation, and evaluation. And again, it's not that I'm reinventing the wheel. I'm just simplifying it. So let's just keep in mind this public policy cycle as we now start to go over to a specialized branch of public policy, which is much more, even more relevant to us, and that is maritime policy. And then we will come back to this cycle later. So, moving over to maritime policy. Now, is it marine policy or is it maritime policy? And if so, and well, the answer really is we're looking at maritime policy. That's what the title of the lecture is. The next question is, why develop a maritime policy? And that is something I would like to also share with you this afternoon. But first, I think it would be very instructive for us to try and grapple with these 2 terms. Sometimes we say maritime, sometimes we say marine. So what gives? What is the difference? In general, I would like to say that maritime, according to the definition in the dictionary, relates to something that is of or relating to sea navigation or commerce. So, transportation at sea, which is basically by ships. Marine, on the other hand, is of or relating to the sea in terms of, for example, marine life. So it's two ways of looking at the sea. One is looking at the sea as a medium of transport, so maritime. This is the surface upon which ships sail and navigate and transport goods from point A to point B. Or you could look at the sea as a habitat or as a resource base. So, hence the concept marine. So it's not so much about navigation or transporting or ships, but rather the sea as habitat or resource base. I would invite you, if this dichotomy interests you, I would invite you to look at this particular article that I have on the screen. One of the authors happens to be here, as a matter of fact, Professor Schroeder. It's very interesting. Maritime and marine, synonyms, solitudes, or schizophrenia. And it's available in the WMU Journal of Maritime Affairs. It's open access, so you can easily download it. It will help you also grapple with these concepts. But in the end, nothing is really drawn with a black marker. It's not you're either this or that. The dichotomy between maritime and marine helps us to grapple with different constructs depending on the usage. But of course, it doesn't help us all the time. But I think it helps us in most cases. And I'll just give you a few examples of where it gets interesting and sometimes confusing. Maritime, we always say maritime safety. We normally don't say marine safety. We say maritime security. We say maritime commerce. Marine commerce doesn't really roll off the tongue as smoothly. We say maritime academy. Or in this case, I should say Dar es Salaam Maritime Institute, not Marine Institute. Maritime Museum, Maritime Cluster, Maritime Domain Awareness, for those of you who study maritime security. On the other hand, marine biology, we say, very clear. It looks at the seas as habitat and resource base. Marine ecology, the same thing. Marine pollution. But here's where it gets interesting. We call the engineers on board ships marine engineers, not maritime engineers. And when we take out insurance for ships, it's not maritime insurance, it's marine insurance. And a ship is a marine carrier of cargo. And the risks that the ship and its cargo and its crew are exposed are referred to as marine peril. So, that's just to highlight the fact that nothing is cut and dry, even though, of course, we should try and apply the right nomenclature where possible. So, back to maritime policy. What is maritime policy? It's the articulation of aims and objectives which should be transformed into actions that will improve outcomes in the maritime context. And so now I'm bringing in bold text maritime context. So again, I'm emphasizing that here in this particular milieu, we're looking at the sea as a medium of transport. So we're looking at shipping. Maritime policy, the one I will be referring to is one that is public in nature. And so it's still, as I mentioned earlier, a specialized segment of public policy. Paramount in terms of maritime policy should be the national interest. There has been There's always talk nowadays of the blue economy, and this is related to the national interest. So any maritime policy related to that aspiration must look to the national interest. Maritime policy has international and regional dimensions because shipping is the most international industry. Every day, a ship will leave one port and potentially arrive at the port of another country. And the ship might be flying the flag of a third country with seafarers from possibly half a dozen different countries. So you can imagine, and carrying goods from who knows how many different countries. So the international and regional dimension of maritime policy is inherent in the industry. Existing and old policies, they need to be kept in mind because not all maritime policy is necessarily new. And in implementing new maritime policy, one must keep in mind existing and older ones to ensure that there is no conflict that the new policy might create. So why would we need to develop a maritime policy? As I alluded to earlier, it's to promote the national interest because the maritime industry is one of the most powerful drivers in economic development, in economic progress. Another reason is to achieve good governance. Where a policy is missing, then we leave a lot of room, a lot of space for bad governance. Leaves room for ambiguous regulation. Let's just say it leaves room for corruption, for corrupt practices. Also, another reason to develop a maritime policy is to ensure that there is a clear mandate and a clarification of the different areas of responsibility of relevant agencies. In the exercise of government, there is sometimes the unavoidable potential to create a plethora of different agencies with good intention, but sometimes overlapping with existing agencies or future agencies. And a maritime policy will help minimize those kinds of overlaps and potential areas for dispute. And another reason why a maritime policy should be developed is to align the country with international developments such as the United Nations Agenda for Sustainable Development, the SDGs. As with the other descriptions, there is really no state-of-the-art definition. There are many different descriptions of maritime policy, and it covers potentially many different areas such as maritime transport policy, port and infrastructure policy, the use of natural resources of seas and oceans, maritime training and education, and marine environmental protection. So again, here, as you can see, there's bound to be some overlap, but it's just important for us to be conscious of the nuances. So, maritime transport policy goes into more direct and specific reference to shipping, because then we're really looking at policy that looks at shipping as a means of transporting or carrying goods and carrying out global commerce. National legislation that is implemented in terms of a national maritime transport policy may deal with several different issues in the maritime industry, such as competition rules for free access, to provide services in an open shipping market, maritime cabotage, especially in states with many islands or a long coastline, maritime safety and security measures, and state aid could be coming in the form of reduced rate of income tax. So incentives and different types of state aid. Maritime transport policy is often translated into legislation. Legislation is by far the most commonly used policy instrument. And when it comes to maritime policy, the basis is invariably international maritime law. So there are standards, there are conventions that serve as the basis for implementing national standards. And why is this especially important in the maritime sector? Back to what I mentioned earlier, shipping is the most international industry. So you don't want a ship to have to be ready to comply with a dozen, a score, or scores of different sets of standards depending on which port they call into. You want to be able to predict what the standards are that apply in the different ports of call of the ship. Otherwise, shipping becomes untenable as an efficient carrier of global trade. So that is why international maritime law becomes very critical and important. As far as umbrella instruments are concerned, the umbrella convention for maritime law is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This is what many jurists refer to as the Constitution of the Oceans. And it deals primarily with maritime issues that have an international character, and it comprises the core, if you will, of maritime and ocean governance. The convention defines the International Maritime Organization, our parent organization, as the competent international organization in different areas. And I won't recount these. I just have in my slide the different provisions where UNCLOS refers to the IMO as the competent organization. It's really relevant in this particular context only in that to say that maritime policy must meet the framework that is set by UNCLOS as it relates to the International Maritime Organization, because it specifies which areas are under the competence of the IMO. And this particular list provides us with the areas over which, according to the Law of the Sea Convention, IMO has competence. Maritime standards, meaning to say standards of safety for ships, duties of flag, port, and coastal states, the control of pollution, the routing of ships, the rules of the road, facilitation of maritime trade, and the promotion of maritime security. And the IMO is invested with the competence to set globally binding international standards. This is why member states such as Tanzania send delegations to the IMO, because Tanzania and the other 175 or 176 member states of the IMO respect and recognize the IMO's competence as the forum for the negotiation and the adoption of the most practicable standards related to shipping. Now, while this power is and authority is recognized by member states of the IMO, it also should be highlighted that it cannot be derogated from or substituted by national standards. So a state goes to the IMO, submits to its standards in good faith, meaning to say the state doesn't come back after having agreed, come back to the Home Office and say, well, actually we're not going to, follow those standards. No, it must be the obligation must be served. Those of you who might be familiar with a very important international law principle relating to conventions, we say pacta sunt servanda. So obligations must be served, must be met. IMO sets international regulatory policy, but it does not, on the other hand, intervene on national policy matters. These are clearly under the prerogative of the governments of member states. So inland waterways has nothing to do with IMO, has nothing to do with these. Waters that are solely under the jurisdiction of a coastal state, these are not subject to normally the international regulatory framework of the IMO. On the other hand, just like the discussion we had on maritime and marine, the lines aren't always clear when dealing with maritime issues at the international level. There is always the potential for overlap between national and international issues. And these invariably will have to be tested in courts of law when a dispute arises. When states embark on policy matters, they must comply with international standards, the international legal framework that I mentioned earlier. Because if a state refuses or neglects or does not promulgate national law in compliance with international standards, then you're looking at unilateral standards being implemented by a state. Then going back to this situation that I mentioned earlier of a ship having to be ready for a dozen, a score, or scores of different sets of standards. Again, it doesn't make sense for an industry that is as international as shipping. In fact, the IMO Secretary General in 2015 said as much. Shipping is international and global. It is not national. It's not regional. No state should seek unilaterally to impose national or regional requirements or standards. Otherwise, that state, should they do so, would also suffer from perhaps being avoided by trading nations who would refuse then to send their ships because they feel that standards are not predictable in that particular jurisdiction. Moreover, states owe certain duties in their capacity as member states of UNCLOS and it is those duties which I outlined earlier. Meaning, say, I shared some of the provisions upon which the IMO, as the competent international organization, has the authority to demand compliance. Well, of course, with international standards that have been agreed to at the supranational level, particularly standards that have been ratified by member states. And I give you a typical example here in the case of Article 94 of the Law of the Sea Convention, where it says every state shall effectively exercise its jurisdiction and control in all matters over ships that fly the flag. So a ship that flies the flag of a country doesn't mean it can do anything it wants. The flag state, the registering state, must exercise administrative control. And these states that register ships shall maintain a register of these ships and assume jurisdiction over ships flying its flag. So it's not only flag and forget, but rather flagging a ship comes with it some very specific obligations. And I just highlight here some of the other points under this provision. Every state ensuring safety at sea regarding their ships, and ships having to conform to generally accepted international regulations. That really means standards adopted at the IMO. And the prerogative of a state, usually a coastal state, to expect proper jurisdiction and control by a flag state with respect of a ship flying that state's flag, and the prerogative to report such incidents where the administrative control is not deemed to be properly exercised. And this last point relates to marine casualties. There is a very clear obligation by states that have an interest in any particular marine casualty to conduct investigation, draw lessons from the casualty, and share this with the world at large. So, having gone through all of those and reviewed the article from UNCLOS, Article 94, what are examples of policy implications? What does that all mean for us as states? Well, under 94, Article 94(2), begs the question, you as a state, or any state, you are to maintain a registry. What kind of registry? Open registry or closed registry? What age restrictions are you going to impose on seafarers manning those ships? How about the nationality of the crew? Are you reserving this only to nationals of the country, the flag of which the ship is flying, or are you opening it to crew from other countries? Casualty investigations is another example. So which national authority undertakes the investigation? So it speaks to an issue that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes there are no clear delineations of the responsibilities, duties and responsibilities of different agencies of state. And once these inquiries are concluded, are the outcomes publicly available or accessible? These are some policy questions that need to be addressed eventually. So, to meet the requirements of these different provisions, a member state should develop an overall strategy to ensure that its international obligations and responsibilities as a flag, port, or coastal state are met. Establish a methodology to monitor and assess that the strategy ensures effective implementation, and continuously review the strategy to achieve, maintain, and improve the overall organizational performance. This is why I requested that you keep in mind the policy cycle, because really this is what this is telling us. And the III code of the IMO, the implementation of IMO instruments code, requires that when a new instrument enters into force for an IMO member state, the state should ensure that implementation into national law is undertaken, and not only implementation but also enforcement. And different states have different systems. Some states are monistic states, where as soon as a convention is ratified, it forms part of the law of the land. Automatically, it is implemented. But some states are, as I understand, Tanzania is a dualistic state, where there has to be two different actions by the state. One is ratification, and then a separate action to enact through parliament, through the legislature, the requisite law that will implement those standards. So a state must promulgate laws. It must adopt a proper legal framework, and it must have sufficient personnel with maritime expertise. So it's not only that a state needs competent members of staff or personnel, it is actually an obligation under the III code. Granted, it is a code, but even if a code is not a convention, it does have persuasive or hortative effect. And each state must answer the question, what is the significance of maritime transport in my economy? And so, if the answer is yes, in most cases it is so, then that country must devise a plan and an implementation program to make maritime administration modern and effective, and take advantage of new technologies, and particularly today, ensure that the energy efficiency requirements in shipping are complied with in order to protect the marine environment. The benefits of a maritime transport policy are the following. It allows the state to attain competitiveness, ensure proper and transparent registration of ships, ensure and improve maritime safety on board ships, ensure maritime security on board and ashore or at sea, combat piracy effectively, safeguard occupational safety and health, and accommodate proper education and training for its seafarers, and allows that country to harness the blue economy. And although the policy itself is left to be dealt with at national levels, when it comes to adopting laws, a member state must meet binding international standards set by the IMO. Again, while a state is sovereign, while the state decides absolutely within its territory and borders as far as IMO instruments are concerned. The freedom in terms of regulation and setting of standards is only limited by the framework that is set by the particular convention in question, or the set of standards in question. So, moving along, let's retack and go back to the policy cycle. Agenda setting, formulation, implementation, evaluation. Now I would like to look at, in a way, the process of policy formulation, implementation, etc. When a state engages in public policy formulation, there is a particularly in the conception stage, there is a tendency to idealize the way humans operate, and this speaks to the idea of comprehensive rationality. Once we try to engage in decision making as policymakers, we look at our own values and aims and say we want to put this into public policy, and the risk usually is that there is a misconception that translating one's own values into policy is a straightforward activity, which is not. You may think, as a decision maker, as a policy maker, you are convinced that a particular line of action is the best for your public. But once you actually test this with peers and colleagues, then all of a sudden cracks appear. And you quickly realize that you do not have a comprehensive grasp of what everybody holds valuable. So, in a situation of comprehensive rationality, the conditions are that any decision making would be based on a comprehensive analysis of problems and goals, which is impossible. Nobody has the ability to cover everything. Those of you who might be familiar with the poem relating to the I think it was 6 wise men of Hindustan trying to describe the nature of the elephant, nobody can really describe the elephant in a comprehensive manner. It depends on which part of the elephant you happen to grab. And it's the same thing with policy. So these are the ideal situations, which are difficult, if not impossible, to attain. Inclusive collection and analysis of information. You wish you could. Analysis of costs and benefits of the different options, and selecting the courses of action. Again, who can guarantee that you've covered everything? Measures implemented and the results evaluated are properly done so against the original objectives, and, if necessary, adjusted. Or the policies decided by elected politicians are carried out by neutral public servants. There is not always a meeting of the minds. In other words, comprehensive rationality is an ideal type, a rational and evidence-based policy making that is valuable in terms of looking at the ideal, but something that one should be careful not to expect. And I just wanted to share this particular quote from Meyerson and Banfield. The reader perhaps also should be warned that our standard of good planning, rational decision making is an ideal one. The standard is, we think, useful for analysis, but real organizations, like real people, if the truth is told, do not make decisions in a substantially rational manner. I think we can all relate to this. And we would be best served if we keep that in mind. What is the real world? Under real world conditions, policies are not the subject of comprehensive evaluations. We all have had the opportunity to design some sort of research or policy, and we try to come up with the best scenario, and that's covering the whole world. But in the end, we find out, no, we can't. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough resources. So we cannot have comprehensive evaluations. Policy processes, they rarely feature clear-cut beginnings and endings. It's like the chicken and egg situation, which really comes first. Policies have always been constantly reviewed, controlled, modified, and sometimes even terminated. And sometimes you don't realize that these have taken place. And policies are perpetually reformulated, implemented, evaluated, and adapted. Policy processes do not evolve in a pattern of clear-cut sequences. The stages that I show, 1, 2, 3, 4, they're constantly meshed and entangled in an ongoing process. And policies do not develop in a vacuum, but rather there is pressure from all sides externally that affects the formulation of these policies. And new policies only modify, change, or supplement older policies, or more likely compete with them or contradict each other, in a way saying that there is nothing really new under the sun. Professor Kearney, again, he says, almost all people must ignore almost everything, almost all of the time. Meaning to say, even here, looking at such an august audience, I have to turn my head to cover everyone. If I look here, then I ignore that part. If I look here, then I ignore that audience. So nobody really has a comprehensive view of everything that's taking place. But as I mentioned, there is an importance to this, because it gives us a perspective, it gives us a context as an ideal to aspire to, but at the same time a pitfall that we must guard against. Now, public policy experts, scientists, they say, of course, now we need to go beyond comprehensive rationality. Let's be realistic. So, different academics, theorists have come up with different explanations. Bounded rationality by Simon, punctuated equilibrium, Baumgartner and Jones, incrementalism by Lindblom, multiple streams analysis, framework approach by Kingdon, garbage can model by Cohen, and just to throw in something into the mix, I come up with my own cluttered desk and complex vortices model, just to help me also understand what this is all about. And this is just a number of the different ways of really understanding how humans act in a policy formulation and decision-making environment. Under bounded rationality, there's an acceptance that, okay, we cannot cover everything. We are limited by cognitive abilities. We have imperfect information. We always, how many times have you reacted to a situation where, hey, I didn't know this, nobody told me about this? Because nobody has perfect or complete information. And there are time constraints. Of course, we always come under time constraints. There's always deadlines. So then you say, I want to travel to this part of the country to conduct a survey. Well, you don't have time. I need the report by tomorrow. So the rationality is bounded by these limitations, and you end up going for the most that you are able to produce within those constraints. And this is what they refer to as satisficing. So it's sufficient enough to satisfy the needs, satisficing. And then in the end, you have suboptimal decisions. Punctuated equilibrium and gradualism is another explanation. It's more of an evolutionary explanation of how policy develops. There's the incremental model that says policy grows and develops in increments. And there is the multiple streams analysis model, where it says a policy is optimally formulated when you have the convergence of three situations. One is a problem is identified, that's a problem window. Then a policy is identified as a solution, as a policy window. And then you have political, the political will. So the political window. So when you have a problem identified, you have a solution identified, and there is the political will, and these three intersect, then you have the policy window. So meaning to say, that's when you are able to implement or formulate policy and maybe even implement it. The garbage can model basically is a different take on the multiple streams analysis. It basically says policy making is like a garbage can. You throw in randomly problems and solutions in this garbage can, and somehow they magically align, and then there's a policy. Well, for a time this was a very popular way of describing policy, but I have a more noble view of government, in spite of all of the criticisms that we throw at it. That, you know, the picture of a garbage can isn't really very appealing, is it? So that's why I said, well, it's probably better to describe it as a cluttered desk. You know, Albert Einstein, Steve Jobs, Mark Twain here, they have cluttered desks. You think it's all messy, but there's actually a method to it. So, you know, you've stored away a potential solution to a potential problem, and you know when the problem arises, I have the exact paper on this, and it's right here, right? So that's your cluttered desk model. But also to describe the way that the cycle doesn't really operate in a perfect manner, not in a linear manner anyhow. I tried to explain it with the complex vortices or colliding galaxies model, that you have, while you're engaged in the policy cycle, there are other constellations, there are other individuals engaged in policy formulation, and these ideas and these activities collide until eventually you come up with the policy. So just thought I'd throw that in the mix as well. Because then I'd like to go then to the case study that I wanted to share with you, which now relates to from the subtitle, From Wreckage to Regulation, from accident to policy. It's very well known that in the case of maritime safety standards, and I'm sure this is the case in many other modes as well, that we are, of course, unable to predict what kinds of accidents will take place. So invariably, what happens is that an accident takes place, and then we come up with a regulation, rather than think, oh, what kind of accidents are coming, and then let's come up with a regulation to prevent that. In a way, if you do that, you don't even know if you'll succeed, because if it never happens, wow, it's because we came up with this. But how sure are we that is the case? So in a way, we're also caught again in this chicken and egg situation. But I just wanted to take us back to the public policy model and relate a particular experience in policy making at the IMO, according to and adapting it to this cycle. And that relates to the International Safety Management Code, the ISM code. And just as a background, this is a relevant and important background to what will eventually result in the ISM code. In the early part of the 1900s, particularly as demonstrated in the disaster of the Titanic, there was a heavy reliance on science and technology to prevent and reduce risk. Didn't pay attention to the human element, as it were, the seafarers, but rather saying that the solution to preventing accidents is really science and technology. Thank you. Sorry. In fact, how did they describe the Titanic? They said it was the unsinkable ship. Nothing is going to sink this ship because we have science and technology on our side. What happened on its maiden voyage? Exactly that. It sank. And they were arguing when during the investigations, why didn't you have enough lifeboats? And the ship owner said, well, if we had enough lifeboats, or if we have too many lifeboats, then that would make the crew more complacent, because they know there's an escape, right? They know there's not enough lifeboats, and they will be more careful. Okay, so a lot of that kind of thinking was prevalent in those days. But there was a paradigm shift in the 1980s because of in spite of the fact that there was a heavy reliance on science and technology, engineering, we're still seeing some really devastating maritime accidents. So it was the beginning of a paradigm shift, moving away from this, what has become a traditional approach. And studies started to look at the issue of the role of the human element in accidents. And focusing on what is referred to as the social technical system. So really, in the case of a ship, you have two subsystems working together to keep the ship safe. You have the human, the personnel subsystem, and the technological subsystem, because humans are operating machines and they have to work, or they have to be designed together in a manner that they will operate safely. Not only machines. Oh, we have safe machines. Well, if you have safe machines but you don't have the right personnel, then it's not going to be safe. Perfect example, you have the most advanced ship, and I'm not saying load it with monkeys to operate it. Okay, of course it will end up in an accident, but no, load it with all of the nuclear scientists in the world. Just because they're smart, does it mean they will operate the ship safely? No. You have to have the right personnel subsystem in accordance to the requirements of the technological subsystem. So that was the kind of study that was starting to develop in the 70s and 80s. Now, as I said, you will find the relevance later on when we look at further into the ISM code. So let's look at the first phase of the policy cycle, agenda setting. 1987, a Ro-Ro ship, the Herald of Free Enterprise, capsized just outside of Zeebrugge in Belgium, the port in Belgium. On its way, ship was on its way to England, capsized. Now, because of the accident where you had 190 people losing their lives, it became a media issue. Okay. And I refer here to this particular slide describing that the agenda is usually framed by the media. Why? Because the media is the source of information in modern times. Right? What do you do if you want to see what's happening anywhere in the world or in your backyard? You look at your phone, you look at the news, you turn on CNN, you turn on BBC. So this is usually where agenda setting starts. Now, from the media, it generates interest in the public start to mobilize, they express their concern, they express their opinion, and then this reaches the decision makers, the policy makers, the politicians, and then they then adopt that particular issue and put it on top of the policy agenda. And this is what happened with the Herald of Free Enterprise. Imagine 190 lives lost, ship coming out of a Belgian port. And we're not going to watch these clips, but just to show you again what the influence, the impact is of media coverage, of course, in spreading the word and spreading the news about a particular incident. This resulted in an official inquiry into the accident, and the commission that conducted the investigation and produced a report said that the board concluded that the board of directors of the shipping company did not appreciate their responsibility. The management from top down to the junior superintendent, they're sharing their responsibility. From top to bottom, this shipping company was infected with the disease of sloppiness, and there was a gross failure to give clear orders, which then contributed greatly to the disaster. So with this, now you've sort of achieved the first phase of the cycle, which is agenda setting. Now it's at the top of the political the policy agenda of the country. Next is policy formulation. What are we going to do about this? So, under this phase, the actions to be taken are decided. So, whatever problems are expressed and proposals and demands are discussed, they are transformed into government programs. Generically, as I mentioned, laws are the most common means of formulating policy. It can be laws, codes, regulations, and ordinances, but could also be taxes and grants and incentives. There could be services that are offered. It can be information campaigns, education and training, and many others. So in the case of the Herald of Free Enterprise, the country that suffered the most number of deaths of nationals was the United Kingdom. So the UK went straight to the IMO and asked for an investigation and come up with measures that would improve the safety of ro-ro ferries to make sure nothing like this happens ever again. And in fact, that same year in November, IMO it was agreed to develop broad guidelines that would help with the safety management of ships and the prevention of pollution. Secretary General at the time stated, what we need now are clear and well-established shipboard operating procedures coupled with periodic unscheduled inspections to ensure compliance. So laying really the ground for something new, something big that we will see eventually will be the ISM code. I just mentioned here some resolutions that relate to the same concern and to the measures that eventually were adopted at IMO. And eventually, the proposed measures were considered and they were unanimously adopted by delegates of countries in 1988, the year later, at the meeting of the IMO's Maritime Safety Committee. Now, when this particular policy was formulated, there wasn't enough support for the policy to become obligatory, but rather it was to come in the form of guidelines. So as you can see here, in 1989 in October, the IMO Assembly, this is the highest decision-making body of the International Maritime Organization, they adopted a resolution that contained the first IMO guidelines on management for the safe operation of ships and for pollution prevention. And this, the Secretary General mentioned, was in recognition of the importance of sound management to shipping safety in general, because if you go back to the Commission's report, there was the disease of sloppiness. The justices were quick to point out to the shipping company. The board of directors were complicit. They did nothing to promote safety. I'll just skip through the details of the code here, but really what the code is trying to do is to ensure that the shipping company takes responsibility in ensuring the safe management of its ships, not just focusing on the commercial aspect of running the ship, because that was a problem with the Herald of Free Enterprise. The ship captains were always under pressure. Turn the ship around quickly, now. What are you waiting for? We're losing money because you're staying in port. Okay, so no, you must take responsibility not only for commercial operations, but for the safe management of your ship. Now, eventually, as guidelines, the shipping community, at least the member states of IMO, found that the impact that they were expecting were not being realized. And this goes back to an earlier comment that I made relating to comprehensive rationality. We don't have comprehensive rationality. What we thought would be sufficient, in effect, as shown here, was not. So there was then a move to upgrade the status of this ISM code and make it an obligatory or mandatory set of standards, so that it was no longer a recommendation, it was no longer a set of guidelines, it was no longer optional, but all shipping companies must comply with the ISM code. And it was implemented or introduced in 2 phases. In 1998, for passenger ships, high-speed craft, oil tankers, chemical tankers, gas carriers, and bulk carriers. And 4 years later, in the second phase, then all other cargo ships, including mobile offshore drilling units. Implementation. The third phase. Just to share with you some pitfalls in terms of implementation. One of the pitfalls is vagueness becoming a momentary expedient to finalizing a set of standards. Imagine getting 176 different member states to agree to the same standards. It's only possible if we engage in compromise. So the alternative would be no standards. So in the end, invariably, this is what happens. So it becomes a pitfall. Also, another pitfall is the failure to articulate precise and operational goals, objectives, and procedures. So then again, even without bad intent, you're still looking then at different ways of interpreting the same regulation. This could lead also to broad powers being given to planning agencies rather than executing agencies. What happens would be, in a policy such as this, becomes unworkable, unsatisfactory, and even sometimes contradictory. So as far as implementation is concerned, this is very much national, individual, again within the framework of the standard, in this case the ISM code, which became part of a chapter in the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. So how is the ISM code implemented in your country? Some countries implement it through their directly through their maritime administration. Some implement it through classification societies that are recognized organizations to undertake those types of exercises. Same thing with the surveys. And then some countries have even gone further than implementing the ISM code on international or seagoing ships and implement it even in their domestic shipping, again to promote safety. I remember another comment I made earlier where the IMO doesn't, the IMO's competence is limited landward of the internal, the boundaries of the internal waters of a state. So has no competence in terms of domestic shipping, but some countries have decided we want safe management obligations imposed on shipping companies, even in inter-island shipping. So, on to the final phase in this public policy cycle. Why should a policy be evaluated? Well, what gets measured gets done. If you don't measure results, you can't tell success from failure. If you can't see success, you can't learn from it. If you can't recognize failure, then you can't correct it. What questions do we ask when we engage in an evaluation of a policy? Is the intervention working as intended? Again, this is a whole cycle from planning to actual implementation and enforcement. I mentioned that there's a big gulf, there's a big gap from the individuals who came up with the idea and the individuals who are now implementing it. Those of you who have been in the field trying to implement policies, how many times have you scratched your head and said, what were these people thinking of, right? Because what you find sensible on the drafting table might not necessarily make sense out in the field. So is it working differently for different groups? Why or why not? So where can the policy be improved? What was the overall impact of the policy? Is it value for money? If we were to do it again, what would we do differently? These are only some of the questions that we would ask in evaluating a policy. In the case of the ISM code, these questions were being asked, or some of these questions were being asked on a regular basis, at least twice a year, sometimes more, at meetings of the Maritime Safety Committee. And just to give an example of the different iterations of the ISM code, has gone through different amendments specifically to address those issues, to fill in, to bridge some of the gaps, some of the weaknesses that have been determined in terms of the implementation and the impact of the ISM code. So, to conclude, just to give an overview again of this afternoon's public lecture. Maritime policies, they are important. And Tanzania, of course, with strong and sincere aspirations in terms of the blue economy, in terms of shipping, in terms of the maritime sector. I know that you are engaged in formulating a maritime policy, and it is very important because it helps promote the national interest. Again, it achieves good governance. It eliminates ambiguities as to who is in charge and who is responsible, and helps the country align with its obligations as a member, as a responsible member of the international community of nations. And while the maritime policy process is not linear, the cycle, as I mentioned, facilitates planning and analysis, and perhaps even when there is time, allows for proactive policy entrepreneurship. This is something that I guess subject for another talk, but is something that we should aspire to in the future. So that, I'd like to say asante sana. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. It was an amazing paper, which is very difficult to summarize before I welcome the questions from the audience. But let me say something. What I have noted is that the professor has understood that we don't have a policy. And therefore, what he has taught us is very important for the policymakers. I know that the process is ongoing, so that they can note the basic principles of formulating and the last one, evaluating. We have had some accidents which actually in other states it caused policy changes when the Herald Free Enterprise capsized because of the opening of the ramp door. We also had MV Bukoba. That was a construction mistake. The ship was wrongly constructed. And how did we go after that accident to so many years without a policy of maritime transport? Although we have a transport policy which has about 6 or 7 paragraphs concerning maritime transport. So, Professor has informed us that the basic of forming a policy is the UNCLOS, United Nations Law of the Sea Convention. That's where you have ship registration as a sovereign matter to be done by a sovereign state. What is our situation here in Tanzania? We have to take into account that we have 2 different registries, not a single registry, and therefore when we formulate our policies, we should have enhanced maritime security, better infrastructures, trade facilitation, and all that matters in the maritime trade. There was a point which he mentioned about cabotage of ships. In Tanzania, on the mainland, we have Merchant Shipping Act. It has a section which is covering cabotage. In Zanzibar, we have Maritime Transport Act, which also covers an area of cabotage. Believe me, I'm an advocate. I was faced with one issue of a ship, whether a Zanzibar ship is allowed to trade on the mainland or not. Now, that is very serious. Lack of policy shows that these questions are coming up. And therefore, this is high time that we understand a policy which makes cabotage to mean a ship coming from outside, not an internal ship, which I can call a cabotage because it's coming from Zanzibar, or cabotage because it's coming from mainland, not to do intertrade between Zanzibar islands. Thank you very much. We have learned a lot. I don't know, it was a very short period of time, but you also told us World Maritime University was formed in 1983. In 1983, even the name changed from IMCO to IMO. And therefore, we welcome World Maritime University as a name changer in the maritime field. Thank you very much. Now, according to our timetable, we come to the point of questions and answers or comments, because you might have no question, you might have a comment. I give you some time to come up with the questions and answers. I know that there are also some professors and doctors over there. Don't feel shy. This is a critical thinking symposium or critical thinking seminar of that nature. Any questions from the floor? Maybe I should ask the first question. And then maybe I'll make the ball rolling to the others. We have in Tanzania a constitution. In the constitution, we have a schedule which talks about union matters. Maritime law is not a union matter, although an aspect of maritime law called harbors is being listed as a union matter. So how can we go on a policy for the union while it's not a union matter? It's a very difficult question, but that's my point. I'm starting to get jittery because we need to change the constitution, because United Nations Law of the Sea Convention talks about the sovereignty powers of a country to register a ship. But we have lowered it down and does that. So please help me to answer that question. Please.
Thank you. I don't think that I could contribute anything meaningful in this particular case, because I just from the conversations I've had, very interesting conversations I've had with Tanzanian students with whom I worked closely at WMU, I couldn't make heads or tails of the issue with the union matters and the actual status of maritime administration between the union and Zanzibar. You may be, of course, you would be aware of the fact that there seem to be two registries in the same country, but that they are not connected to each other. I mean, there are such examples in different countries, but they are administered by the same administration, by the same authority. So I think you have, in my mind, the only answer I could come up with is something that you had already mentioned, in that is going back to the basic law, to the Constitution. And I think I'd be treading on very thin ice to make any meaningful comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the ball is on your court. Do you have any questions? Well, I don't see any hand.
There is one.
Yes, yes. There's a hand there, at long last.
Thank you so much, Prof, for your very insightful lecture. I just want to ask a question. If you can tell us whether the ISM code has any provision to do with a country that is in a theater of war, a country that is in armed conflict. What does the ISM say? Thank you so much.
Thank you. In fact, the ISM code does not make any direct reference to situations of armed conflict. A state that administers or has jurisdiction over a ship flying its flag, which is under its registry, is, whether in time of war or peace, obliged to comply with the existing and applicable standards. In terms of a war situation, what the ISM code where the ISM code would be relevant is in terms of protecting the lives of its crew and passengers, and also the marine environment. So really, the provisions under the ISM code that require ships to have documented measures to address critical operations, and this is what I can say would be relevant in that particular situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Now I want a lady Is there a lady around? Oh, come on. Okay, doctor, you're welcome. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the professor for the excellent presentation on the issue of maritime policy. And I would like to subscribe for what the professor has said, especially how to make the policy into making. For example, after the capsize of MV Bukoba, the IMO assisted the government of Tanzania. There was a formal investigation and the recommendations were made. But IMO took it further by saying that they need to assist the government of Tanzania to improve safety of navigation in Lake Victoria, because the report came out and said there is no harmonized law operating in Lake Victoria. So I would like to have subscribed to show how the policy making sometimes is very difficult, especially when it has to do with two or more countries. So IMO assisted the government of Tanzania, especially the East African community. I was a coordinator. I was asked to go to Arusha to oversee this project. And one of the issues which was to be undertaken was to prepare maritime legislation. Now, the consultant actually did the job, went to all the 3 countries, and they established comments, and we drafted a draft maritime legislation in Lake Victoria. Now, second stage now, that was from the expert. Now, second stage now came now from the legalese people. So they have to come from 3 countries and prepare now harmonized document. I'm talking now from 2003 until 2007. That's where the document was approved by the East African Legislative Assembly after going all these steps. So you see how the policy making is very difficult. It involved a lot of stakeholders, experts like my brother there, who basically you bring them on board, because you find out Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, the drafters, they've got a different approach. Bring them together, it is very, very difficult. So I fully support and subscribe to your lecture to say that so many things need to be done to harmonize. In our country, especially, my brother has said it, there are other issues currently underway to put up in place maritime transport, because you need to have a policy so that you can make a regulation. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much. Before I take another question, let me comment on MV Bukoba. The 2 ministries on the mainland and Zanzibar established a task force under the chairmanship of Professor Mahalo. Fortunately, I was a member of that task force. We came up with several recommendations. We were looking at the laws. At that time, we had inland waters, and then we had the Merchant Shipping Act 1967, which was modified a little bit to take in the regulations of STCW. We proposed that although maritime is not a union matter, but we need what the professor has just said, a maritime authority to combine both sides. And process started to establish a maritime authority, one maritime authority to take care of both sides of the union. It's very unfortunate that in 2003, the mainland enacted the Merchant Shipping Act, and in it, Section 2, subsection 1, specifies that a ship registered under that act, is a Tanzanian ship. Well, when it came to 2006, Maritime Transport Act was enacted in Zanzibar, which also said a ship registered under that act is a Tanzania-Zanzibar ship. So the sovereignty remains. Both are Tanzanian ships, but both have different flags, the same flag, different registrations. Thank you very much. And with that note, I think I've been informed that time is, very of essence. I bring the last question for only 60 seconds, 1 minute. Ask the question, please. At back there.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Marks, for the classical and presentation of the maritime policy.
us as we are embarking on the process of preparing our own maritime policy. I would like, on behalf of Dar es Salaam Maritime Institute, I would like to thank you, Professor Marks, and your delegation to accept this invitation, and it has been quite a blessing to us. Thank you very much. And I really don't have much to say. Thank you everyone for coming, for those who are here, and for those who are listening or following us online also. This is just the beginning. We are going to continue bringing here in Tanzania experts from around the world for the purpose of establishing maritime sector in Tanzania. Thank you very much and have a good evening. I would like to thank Captain Bendera. I don't know what I would have done if I wouldn't say this here. I would like to thank you very, very much and for this moderation that you have done for us. And thank you for the expertise and bringing up the issues that we really are facing that needs to be tackled from time to time here and there for a better establishment of our maritime industry here in the country. Thank you, and claps for Captain Bendera. Thank you.
Okay, now we can all stand up and clap and say goodbye to Professor, because he's going to the airport. Please, clap your hands. Thank you. Thank you. Please.
Never.